Hello, everybody. This is Nick Totaro, Professor of Information Technology and Computer Science, Lakeland Community College. I routinely read the internet for news stories associated with cybersecurity incidences, not to scare myself, not to be one of those, the sky is falling, but to pass along to people and say, okay, here's the particular situation we need to be careful on. I came across one this week that really sparked my interest because of the truly the insidious nature of it, right? A little bit of a background first. Linux, BSD, Ubuntu, all these platforms, plus all these other open source programs, free apps, apps that are ad driven, things like that. So much of what we do on the internet is coming from open source. So many of the things we do in programming logic, we are using libraries. If you've never taken a programming logic course, but you are writing code at home, oftentimes we go out there and we get libraries. So this whole concept, if we want to call it crowdsourcing, is incredible to me. I've always been amazed by that. Personally, always been amazed that there are people who wake up every day saying, I want to improve X. Every day somebody says, I want to improve Linux. I want to write code that people will use. For example, the program that I use, or most of the programs that I use for these videos, are open source. I do checking on them. I ask people, I check the internet, I do some research on them before I pull them down because you know what? It's well known that there could be viruses or malware. So if you're going to use open source code or if you're going to use a Linux distribution, you want to think about those things. Don't lose sleep over it, but you don't want to go out there and just grab a code saying, oh, this code does X. It's really cool. Has it been tried and true? Are you the bleeding edge of the technology? But there are tried and true programs, open source projects, we should really call them. For example, like I said, I use the video editing tool called OpenShot. It's an open source project that allows me to do video editing. I use the open source project Audacity to do audio files. So there's a lot of open source to OBS is another one that I use, and they're great, right? When I write code, if I'm doing programming logic and I write code, I routinely use standard libraries or libraries that are in the standard library. But for example, Beautiful Soup is one. OS, Request, there's several of them out there. So open source is a valuable tool to many people. It's not just to save money. It does push the envelope of very positive production. So that is cool. And that's where things are insidious. It came across just the news service this week. It is, April, the first week of April, 2024. Let's go to my screen and let's truly think about this. And it says, why a near miss cyber attack puts U.S. officials and the tech industry on edge. Couple things there. It's a little bit misleading what happened here. It really wasn't a cyber attack yet. It was a potential catastrophic situation, but it wasn't an attack. It wasn't like we saw denial of service or anything like that. What was it? Well, basically, the software engineer or developer, Andres Freund, was running some testing in a particular environment. He does work for Microsoft. He was running some things and he was looking at some open source utilities. And one of the open source utilities, I'm not really familiar with it that much, is something called XZ Utils, but from what I understand, it's a very popular utility. It is used for compression. It's been out for many years. The original developer of it began to get tired. The original developer did mention that there was some, he needed some time off away from it. It was an open source, open project, which they tend to be very careful about. Somebody kind of came into this project that looked very reputable and said, hey, I want to work on it too. Over the course, it was a long term, over the course of years, that second individual got into the good graces of the developer and the development team, right? So at one point, they basically turned over the responsibility of the development of this well-known, well-established, and that's the scary part, XZ utils that are in most Linux distributions over to this secondary tier developer. And this article, I'll provide the link in the webpage, below the webpage on this if you want to read it. Hopefully it'll stay up there for a while. Was very, very almost scary, but it's a good article. They kind of break it down. And the original author was Lasse Collins, and Collins basically said he needed some relaxation. You need to get away from this stuff. So over the course of time, using GitHub and these other collaboration tools, he turned the project over to a developer called Gia10. Now, let me say something. We have to be very careful. We can report the facts, but we don't want our opinions or something running wild. We don't want to say, oh, this is a Chinese government plot, right? They don't know yet, right? But there was this individual, Gia10, who basically they turned the project over. Eventually, long story short, Gia10 was discovered that it was not a single individual. Right? It could have been a team of individuals. They suspect that maybe it was state-sponsored individuals. But you know what? In a long enough game, you get confident. The distribution of where people are, who's working on it. We're now in a worldwide economy. You may never meet your colleague or anything like that, but it was discovered. There's a good chance that Gia10 was not a single individual. That Gia10 was a state-sponsored group of individuals. Now, here's what happened. We'll just call it TAN basically inserted a backdoor into XZ utils that wasn't discovered, wasn't used yet, but he put, I'll use gender pronoun, Gia10 put a backdoor into X utils. They're pretty confident there was no breach. But if this installation of XE utils would have been put into the releases of all the different Linux. For example, Ubuntu, great Linux platform. Red Hat, great Linux platform. There could have been a time or a potential where XZ utils would have been compromised and nobody would have known. It would not have reported as malware. Now, we were lucky. The industry was lucky because so much is run on Linux. If you go up to the internet, a lot of the platforms are running off of Linux. So very interesting, very scary here. Very interesting, very scary attack. So what does that mean for us as programmers? What does that mean us as developers? What does that mean for cybersecurity, ethical hackers? We still have to be extremely cautious about the libraries and the open source projects that we are involved with. We just can't take things on face value. Yes, I use open source all the time. I use OBS Studios. I use OpenShot. I use Hashcat. I use all these open source utilities. But usually when I go looking for an open source project, I look for ones that are well established. Well, I will tell you what is scary about this particular environment was XE utils was well established, right? What could I have done as an end user? I don't know. It's very, very challenging, but good thing this was discovered, because if this would have been distributed, then we're backtracking, we're shutting things down. Who knows what potential implications. So be careful of your open source. Obviously, you want to go after products that are tried and true, well established, that people have used, that get highly recommended from many, many individuals and not just a single organization. And then, real simple, don't trust as much. I hate to say this, but always have a reasonable level of healthy doubt. All right, let's wrap things up. Didn't want to scare people. This is another just a simple report of what is going on in the world, and it's a war of escalation, right? I love the internet. I'm not going to be living my life in fear of never going up to the internet. But there are things I'm not going to download open source programs just to download and see what's going on. I'm going to be cautious about it. I tend to favor VPNs. I don't like going on open Wi-Fi's, right? I like to have that little bit of healthy doubt. That being said, let's go and learn something.